What's up, everybody? This is Jeff from Audiobooks All Day, and I just read Band of Brothers by Stephen Ambrose, and I want to tell you about it. Band of Brothers focuses on the story of the men that served in Easy Company in the 101st Airborne Division. And it's all about their journey from Camp Toccoa when they first started their airborne training, all the way through to the end of World War II. The story begins in Camp Toccoa, which is where all of the men have come for their initial airborne training. It's grueling, and it's not made any easier by Captain Herbert Sobel, who is the company commander over the men. He pushes them to their limit, especially by having to hike up this big hill called Currahee every single day. Eventually, we find the soldiers, having completed their airborne training, and have really grown close together through all the grueling months and even years of training. At that point, they're shipped out to England, where they know they're preparing for something big. Sure enough, they find out that it's a part of the European invasion that will hopefully be the spearhead that will stop Hitler's army and drive them back to Germany. Their first mission is a midnight jump into Normandy, France, as a part of the Allied response to Hitler taking over Europe. This was called Operation Overlord, also known as D-Day. Because of the chaos of the actual jump, many men were separated. Some were alone, some in small groups. We actually wind up following one small group led by Lieutenant Richard Winters. He is one that throughout the book we've really come to love. He has amazing leadership qualities. His men really trust him. And as they get together, they actually find the regimental headquarters after some brief combat during the night. It's at this point this small group is tasked to take out German artillery that is actually firing down on Utah Beach. They make their way there, and through heroic actions of many individuals, they wind up accomplishing the mission, which winds up saving many lives on Utah Beach. This sets the tone for the rest of Easy Company's experience in Normandy. They are always at the front. They are always pushing forward. While their time in France is relatively brief, they wind up accomplishing a lot, but at the cost of a lot of men's lives. There were many casualties throughout their time in France, but it left them going back to England in a much better position in terms of their experience and in terms of their confidence in being able to handle themselves in combat. Easy Company's next mission was also a combat jump, but this time into Holland during Operation Market Garden. At this point, the ranks are starting to be filled with replacements, and there's a natural distrust there between the combat veterans and the replacements. The replacements look up to the combat soldiers, and they want to be like them. But at the same time, the combat-hardened soldiers are starting to learn to not necessarily trust replacements because they may not be around for long. You start to see these different relationships start to blossom and unfortunately end in tragedy in a lot of these cases. But you're seeing still the growth of these soldiers as they're going throughout some of the hardest fighting during World War II. After being pulled from the front lines, Easy Company's rest and relaxation is cut short because of the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge, which was Hitler's last-ditch effort to try and stop the Allies from all of their progress. This was a tough battle. Unfortunately, the Allies didn't have the adequate winter gear. They didn't have the adequate ammunition in order to be able to fight such a prolonged battle against, really Germany's last hope to stop the Allies. But they go, and for months, they're in the bitter cold, facing artillery barrages all the time. And it's here where you start to really see some of the men break down, especially as some of the legacy soldiers that have been there from the beginning begin to get wounded and being, sent home. This really, really hits hard when you see Bill Garnier and Joe Toy, who are two people that have been there since the very beginning of Easy Company. Unfortunately, in one engagement, each one loses a leg. And you see brave soldiers like Buck Compton start to really be able to have a hard time with being able to continue. Not because they're not brave, not because they're not awesome, but because it's just been so much combat in so many places over such a long period of time that it starts to really, really weigh on them. Easy Company's time during World War II is not even over. At this point, they go into Germany and they capture Hitler's Eagle's Nest, which is a castle called Berchtesgaden, which was Hitler's personal summer home. And it's there that they get kind of the satisfaction of being able to see the culmination of their service. At that point, they go into peacekeeping, where they try and make sure that all of the progress that they had made isn't for naught. And they're still hunting down different Nazi soldiers, and they're still trying to keep even the peace between themselves. Because right now you just have a lot of young men with nothing to do with access to weapons, and that does lead to some tragedy, unfortunately. Eventually, it's time for Easy Company to come home, and the last remaining part of the book really kind of delves into their lives afterwards. And some people had a really hard time, some were really successful, and a lot just wanted to put the war behind them. And it's been really kind of satisfying in a way as you kind of get to the end to see the culmination for some of those that you really loved and see how happy they were. But at the same time, you're really left feeling sad for some of those that just weren't able to move beyond the war, and through divorces or even suicide in some cases. That was their way to handle it. I think for me, listening to Band of Brothers really put a lot of things in perspective. I think that the way it's written is super personal. Like, even though that you're dealing with a lot of different characters, and even though it's totally historical, you really feel for them. And I think if there was something for me that I really learned is leadership. You see good leaders and you see bad leaders. I highly recommend this book. I think that whether you're a student of history or whether you're just learning about World War II for the first time, this is a perfect place to start or continue your journey in knowledge. I think because it takes place over such pivotal moments in the war's history that are important for all of us to remember and especially appreciate. I'd highly recommend it. Thank you for going on this journey with me, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks.